Good afternoon, everyone. This is Zach Lucas, McCarthy Denning. Just bringing us into this webinar, the regional talk Malaysia, Thailand. Just before we get started, I'll do the usual sort of housekeeping. Obviously, this is second to last in the series of governance and succession talks that we've been doing since late August. Malaysia, Thailand today, and then tomorrow we will have the single family office governance and succession sort of finale for the entire series. Coming back to today's session, just introduce the panelists. As usual, we've been joined by Spencer Su, the Deputy Director of Monetary Authority of Singapore, Juniper Sittapat from One Law Office in Bangkok, Thailand, and Go Kayam from a partner, Shira Delamore and Co. in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So these are the panelists that are joining me today to run through the Malaysia, Thailand sort of business, family, governance and succession program. In terms of the agenda, we'll look at, as we have in the previous series, the business family demographics for each of the subject countries today. We'll look at the typical succession planning that the families undertake within the relevant markets. And then we'll look at the governance planning or the governance frameworks that are typical of that market. We'll then look at whether or not and to what extent international financial centers like Singapore, Hong Kong, and elsewhere can be involved in the governance planning process or the succession planning process with the business families in terms of international structuring, whether it's through a corporate or through a trust structure. We'll then transition and look at the domestic family office environment within, let's say, Bangkok or KL, and we'll see whether or not there is demand for family office services. If there is this a strong demand, or is it just nascent and emerging? And then finally, we'll look at the demand within the markets for international family offices. And here we'll specifically be discussing the single family office in Singapore and the initiatives that have been surrounding that. So that's today's program. In terms of the family demographics, I would ask the following questions for each of the panelists. Which is the generation that is typically in control now of the family businesses? Obviously, it's a generalization, but typically, who's in control? The average number of family members that we anticipate will succeed to the business, of how big of a governance challenge do the families have? And how soon do we anticipate this transition of wealth going forward? So I'd invite Kim to lead us off with which generation is typically in control of the family business from a Malaysia perspective.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. In Malaysia, we typically see that the generation in control would either be the first or the second. More often than not, it's the first, and they're starting to think of passing on to the next generation.
And the average number of members that will succeed. So how big are the families, the business families typically in Malaysia, in terms of the sixth generation?
It ranges in size. I mean, obviously we have really huge conglomerates. You know, to top of my head, we can name some of the big families that frequently feature in you know, the top 50 richest families in Asia. You have the Genting Group, you have the IOI Group. So those are, you know, we're talking about really large sums of money in those families. And probably more under the radar, you have the smaller family businesses, not the headliners, but even then we're still talking about substantial sums of money. So depending on the, you know, the situation in each family, and obviously through advice as well, it probably works better if you just have one successor. But sometimes, of course, because the family itself is in various, you know, involved in various divisions or industries, they could also determine within the family that, you know, child number one will run the property sector. Child number two might run the plantation sector.
Mm.
So that could happen too. But oftentimes it's just one single successor.
So in terms of the sort of family sizes, we saw in one of the previous regional talks that in terms of Japan, the Japanese business families, generally the families have no more than 2 children. And so what they see in terms of generational transfer is the succeeding generations that actually get involved in the business. It's no more than the ones that they're replacing in many cases. So we don't see this proliferation of let's say second gen, and then it moves to the cousin generation, and then it gets more and more, because this is the inherent complexity of family businesses, is that there's going to be a greater amount of individuals to coordinate going forward. But from what you're saying, from a Malaysia standpoint, are the families particularly large, or they're very nuclear in terms of the size of the family themselves?
No, they're definitely, from the ones that we've dealt with, they're definitely not in terms of 2 like Japan.
Yeah.
It's frequently, possibly 4 or more. And I think as well, if you're talking about Asian families, Chinese families, Malay families, they tend to like the idea of having more, more children, more issue.
Yes. Right.
So it's oftentimes encouraged.
Yes. Yes.
So 2 is very unusual. It'll usually be a much larger family.
Right. And there's generally a lot of certainly in the sort of private wealth press, for want of a better word, there's a lot of discussion around the great transition of wealth that's about to unfold in Asia due to the retirement of first generations. In practice, though, do we see this generational transfer happening within the next 3, 5, or 10 years? Is it immediate, or do you feel where are we in terms of the timing? Because certainly from a sort of popular press perspective, they think it's about to occur tomorrow.
I don't think it's that immediate. I think it's more likely to be 5 years. I think you can see that they've got the idea now that they need to prepare and plan for the future, but it'll still take time, and it still takes time, I think, to let go. So I don't see it happening so immediately and tomorrow. It's probably too soon.
But you see a mix of first and second generation businesses. That's basically the mix that's currently going on in Malaysia, first and second. But it's hardly ever that we see third generation businesses. That's about right, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, hardly ever. Okay, Jennifer, from your perspective, when you look at the Thai business families, and obviously you're very much involved in them, particularly in Bangkok, which generation is typically in control of these businesses? Are we seeing second generation, third generation, or what's generally the feel when it comes from a Thai perspective?
From the Thai family business perspective, the generation that control the business, most of them are the second generation or third generation, because the background of the family business in Thailand, many family business in Thailand over 100 years, and they are the centennial family business. And then the rest are the half of the century. Then the third generation now take control the business, and in some new family business just start, and then first generation control the business. But you see, uncertain for the first generation to prepare the succession plan to the next generation, because the aging of the family business still short.
Right. And the size of a typical Thai sort of family or business family, when we're looking at second generation transferring to third and third to fourth generation, what sort of numbers are we talking about in terms of the amount of family members involved? Is it sort of 20, 30, or is it higher than that?
Oh, or over 50, and some family members over 100 family
Right.
members.
Total.
But the active family members that involved in the business, not much.
Right.
Maybe half of them. It depends on the expertise and the passion in the
Right.
business of the family.
Right. And in terms of this transition, third to fourth and fourth onwards, is this again coming back to what I said to Kim about the popular perception that Asia is just on the cusp of a huge generational transfer? Is it true to say that it's within 3 years, within 5 or 10? What do you see as the sort of typical time period before this transition actually begins to get going?
In terms of the from my experience, I can see that 10 years is the average. For example, the central group, the aging of the family business around 70, 80 years, and then the succession plan to prepare the successor around 10 years.
About
But
10 years. Right.
yes, around 10 years. It depends on the education, not the in system, not the systematic education,
Right.
but the education in terms of the family business succession plan. Because in Thailand, we just start around 10 years, 15 years back.
Right, right, okay. Okay, moving on just to the actual succession planning that the families undertake. These are the questions that I would posit. What sort of, just to start off the discussion, what's the typical platform that the families adopt in terms of their operating businesses? Is it corporate, partnership, or other forms? Do the families typically transfer the business only when they pass away, or do they effectively do what's called accelerated inheritance and gift over the shares to the next generation during their lifetime? And do families ever structure the succession? Do they use trusts or any other forms of arrangement? We can discuss the progress of the trust legislation in Thailand. Do families transfer the business to the next generation equally, or do they transfer unequally? Let's say preferring an older son, or only preferring members that have a demonstrated competency. How do we generally transfer the businesses? And then are there any community property or forced heir clawback concerns that would interrupt the succession process for the family? So Kim, again, if I invite you to kick us off, just looking at the typical Malaysian family business, what form do they typically adopt? Is it partnership based or is it corporate based?
It's corporate based. I think that's the vehicle and entity that's the most used for most family businesses, and that's how they would have the succession planning. You start with the company, and then it moves on from there in terms of how you go about with the planning.
Right, and in terms of the shareholders. Do they basically dispose of their shares through their wills or more radically through an intestacy, or do they actually try and do it during their lifetime? What's the general feel for how families transition the wealth? Is it lifetime or is it only when they pass away?
I think it depends on how perhaps old-fashioned the patriarch is. Those who are slightly more old-fashioned, they might be very concerned about passing over the reins of the business too soon.
Mm.
So I think they do start by bringing in members of the family into the business and to see how they perform, and then they'll start perhaps giving the family members more responsibility. So oftentimes they may agree beforehand and they may start transitioning, but it could very well be that it's only upon the death that it actually crystallizes.
Yeah.
So that's one form of doing it. And the perhaps the more modern families, especially if they've been taking advice, may then also consider transitioning during the lifetime. So you may have trusts set up during the lifetime of the patriarch or foundation. so that these things are in place.
Right. Do the families utilize some of the advanced trust legislation in Lab 1 to achieve this? Or the foundation legislation in Lab 1, do they tend to do that? Or do they look at the sort of peninsular laws?
I think it depends. Definitely the legislation in Lab 1 is a plus because, you know, as you may know, Zach, the trusts in Lab 1 can be perpetual, which
Yes.
you can't have if you have a trust under peninsular rules, because we follow the British, the UK trust position, common law position.
Yes.
So you can't have a perpetual trust. And we find as well that Lab 1 foundations are becoming more popular, probably because you can have a little bit more control compared to a trust. Because as you know, a trust, once you set it up as a such law, you've basically divested yourself of any interest, you know, unless you name yourself as a beneficiary, any interest in those assets that you put into the trust. Where if you do it via Lab 1 foundation, then of course you're able to reserve some rights to yourself.
How many of the families actually do this though? Is it basically only the very well-advised families who can afford to get good advice, or is it generally known that families could look at trust solutions for this? How popular is this to do a trust solution for a business family? I
think it's getting more popular. Certainly, it's getting more known, and it helps that their advisors, whether in terms of their bankers, or even the lawyer who advises the company and the family in their family matters. If it's introduced to the family members, and if they know more about what options they are available to them, I think they start becoming more receptive. And that is possibly also true if the second generation is sort of already having a role to play in the business. So they might also advise the father or the mother that, being sort of more up to date and more knowledgeable about how other families have been doing it in the rest of the world. So they could also start talking to the patriarch or the matriarch and planting the seed and getting them to consider this sort of options.
Yes, and then in terms of where they don't do a trust arrangement and they transfer it through their estates or lifetime transfers, is it equal inheritance across the board, no matter if the children are involved or not involved in the business, or is it preferring the son only, or what does it generally look like in terms of how
it very much depends on it very much depends on the family. I mean, we've seen certain families, as you say, prefer the son more than the daughters. So the sons could be the ones that inherit the shares that goes towards running the business, while the daughters may well be compensated in other ways, with property or with cash rather than with shares. And I think they do realize that it becomes quite difficult if you divide it equally, because it sort of waters down the control in terms of the shareholding.
Yeah.
So if you have an anointed successor, for example, it could very well be that the anointed successor gets the bulk of the shares,
right,
and the others will be compensated in other ways.
That's very interesting, because that's quite a US approach to things, isn't it? Quite an American approach to this. So in terms of community property enforced there, that's not really a consideration in terms of Malaysia as a common law jurisdiction. Is that right to say?
Well, in terms of forced heir, I mean, if you're talking about non-Islamic
yes, sorry.
Persons, then definitely it's not a concern.
Right.
I think community property only comes in if for example, you have certain children who are overseas, where community property could be an issue if there's a divorce.
Yes, fair.
But of course, Malaysia, in a limited way, under our act as well, our Law Reform Family and Marriage Act, there is also concerns that the court will take into account property that was accumulated during the marriage.
Okay. Juniper, from your side, if you're looking at a typical family in Thailand, are they operating through corporate structures, or is it more of a partnership structure? How do they generally operate their businesses?
In Thailand, the most of the family business adopt the family holding company.
Right.
It is a corporation, not a trust, because Thailand, we adopt the civil law system country, and we have no family trust, where we have no private trust, unless we have a real estate investment trust in the stock market. But the draft law of the private trust is still in the process, and then hopefully in a few years next, we will have the family trust in Thailand, and now most of the billion trillion US dollar they set up the trust in Hong Kong, in Singapore,
Yes.
in Jersey and Delaware many years before.
Right. And in terms, just coming back to the succession process itself, typically, do families, if they don't structure abroad, and we'll get to the international structuring of some of how this can be done, but in terms of domestically, do families tend to wait until they pass away to transfer ownership of the shares in the business, or do they gift the shares during their lifetime and basically help the next generation to work together by doing that? What typically happens?
From my experience, the will drafting prepare for the business transfer to the next successor, and some of them they transfer the business after the death, and then many court case among the family members, they get fight in the court battle because no will drafting clearly.
Right. So they tend to do it through wills, but there's been a lot of bad experiences with families fighting after the relevant member has passed away. That's been the experience. So has that meant that the families have then looked at maybe doing it during their lifetime rather than relying on doing it through testamentary processes?
In terms of the lifetime, not only the will drafting. From my experience, some family business, they prepare the successor, and the successor not only one, not single successor, but in the form of a committee. For example, three successor in separate business. For example, retail, office, hotel, something like that.
Right. And in terms of the community property and forced heirs, what's the position within a Thai context where an individual passes over shares either during their lifetime or on their death with respect to community property and forced heir rights? Does that work? Is that effective in Thailand as a consideration? And if it is, what do the families do to manage that risk?
Yes, in Thailand, we found that the spouse can live together without the marriage registration, and if the marriage registration adopt, the spouse can do the prenuptial contract.
Right.
And prenuptial contract can be used when the spouse divorce.
Right.
And in addition to the prenuptial contract, the will drafting and the shareholders agreement among the group of the companies adopt. This is to avoid any takeover opportunities, any risk of the share transfer to the third party.
Right. And in terms of forced heir rights, do we have that concept in Thai succession law where members have automatic rights to the shares?
That's right. If no will, if no prenuptial contract, the forced heir right will be adopted in Thailand.
Right, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So just moving on.
Sure.
So just moving on to the governance aspects, because there's one aspect of obviously the way in which the families confer the ownership of the business across generations. But then there's a question surrounding how they prepare the next generation for working together in the business. And here, questions I'll ask is, do families create specific governance frameworks to help the next generation to work as a team? Do families take into consideration best practice corporate governance codes, such as the requirement to have independent directors, separation of chair and CEO, enhanced transparency and disclosure of information across the shareholder group, enhanced related party transaction rules to help members to feel at ease that there isn't abuse of the family business, director remuneration and related disclosure rules, independent audit. These are just some. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are just some of the best practice corporate governance codes that would sort of ask families to take into consideration that these are best principles when adopting a approach to the next generation working together. And then finally, if they do adopt best practice corporate governance codes, where do they typically put these codes, or where do they typically put the provisions? Is it in a shareholder agreement, or is it embedded in the company constitution, or do they put it into trust deeds? So again, Kim, if I could ask you to give us just a general sort of survey of how governance is dealt with within the families as they prepare for the next generation to take the helm.
Yeah, we certainly see that it's now become more popular to have some sort of family constitution. And I think it serves as more as a guide to perhaps the family ethos, setting up the expected conduct, behavior of family members, as well as stressing the importance of family. So quite often in this family constitution, it will encourage the different members to work together, and obviously to also encourage them to have family time together. So, it is now becoming very popular that within the constitution, you will have things like members of the family should meet, 2-3 times a year. And it sets out as well, it helps to set out as well the expectations if any members of the family goes into the business. So that, it may say that you need certain qualification before you can be considered for a particular post, senior management. Yeah, so you can't just expect. Yeah, so I think that helps, because then it makes it very clear what the position is, so that there are no accusations later that preference of one over another and that sort of thing. So it is becoming more popular. In terms of best practice corporate governance codes, I think especially if it's a private company and it's not a public listed company, then they may not be so concerned. So for example, even if you have under your item of independent directors, separation of chair and CEO. So even if they do have a separation of the chair and CEO, oftentimes the two of them will be related anyway.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't go as far as it would in a usual company, because the thinking and the belief is that, you're all members of the same family controlling this company. So, you do not have to so strictly enforce the usual corporate governance codes that perhaps a non-family business company would strictly adhere to.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite typical for a family not to sort of take advantage of the sort of chain of accountability and supervision that ordinary corporate law would provide. It's just when looking at not the current generation in control, but looking at perhaps helping the next generation, there's always an idea of trying to make them a little bit more professionalized.
Yeah, but of course that's also limited by provisions of law. Now we have we had a new Companies Act that came in 2016, so that provides for certain minimum rules that have to be complied with. Right. For example, disclosure of information.
Yes.
And of course, if you're if you're a director with an interest, you need to disclose it. Those are all. Yes. So if those are all provided by by law, then obviously they have to comply.
Right, right. And in terms of if they do adopt this, you're saying that mostly they will look at a family charter as the route to do this.
I think the family charter is more as a guide, so that within the family they know what to expect, but that is not necessarily legally enforceable anyway.
Right.
So
right.
to ensure that it's something that is legally enforceable, it's usually in the shareholders agreement or the corporate constitution.
Right.
So that makes it clear it's in the shareholders agreement that
Yes.
you've all signed up to it, and it's enforceable by law.
Right, right. Okay. Jennifer, from your side, given the maturity of the business families in Thailand, have they looked very carefully at these best corporate governance practices? It's separate from the family governance side of the family acting in unison and trying to keep together, but looking at the interface between the family and the actual operating business. Do the families tend to look at these particular corporate governance codes as a guide for the best practice that they should adopt, or how do they generally do that in Thailand?
In terms of the family business governance, I, I can say that go back to around 10 years before. In Thailand, we launched the knowledge in terms of the family charter or family constitution introduced by the university, not the state university, but the private university, and run by the academic, run by the lecturer to educate the family business community in Thailand to understand and to know the family rule as a charter, but not governance. The governance or CG, corporate governance, is required in the public, in the capital market, only for the public company. But in terms of the family business as a private company, and they don't concern about the governance. They concern about how to create or use any device to prevent or protect the family members from any conflict from inside. Then then they found that the family holding company, the family charter, the family will shareholders agreement, they use many devices to prevent any conflict in the future. And then up to now, the wording family business governance as the umbrella of many devices for the family business to use. And one of them is to succeed the business to the next generation without any conflict or reduce any risk of the conflict.
Right. So they tend to do it through a charter approach. Is that right?
Yes, the charter, in Thailand, similar to Malaysia, I think, or the other countries, the charter or family constitution, not the law, no legal binding. And then it is a family rule and commit and engage only for the family members on the telemed basis. You cannot copy or replicate this family charter from this family to use with another family. No, you cannot do the Google search and use the template. No, because a different background, different business model or the family business.
Right, right. So I suppose that brings us on to direct questions on family constitutions. And what you're saying is they're uniquely popular in a Thai context. The supplemental questions on them are, what's the legal implications of a family charter? And typically, who are drafting these charters from your perspective? Is it lawyers, accountants, the private bankers, or is it the business school academics, as you mentioned before?
Okay. From my experience, until now, we provide the service of the family charter drafting, creating, processing to set up the family charter until the family office, because the family charter like a guideline, not the contract, no legal binding, and how to create something non-legal binding to use with enforcement. We will use the enforcement not by way of law, because there's no legal action, but we use the family charter as the family financial sanction.
So
But
sort of you use
yes,
family politics to
that's
put
right.
people in
That's right.
line. Okay,
That's
well
right.
that's another alternative dispute resolution mechanism, I suppose.
Right. The family sanction pass through the family welfare, financial support among the family members. If
Yeah,
you breach out the family rule or family charter, you will be prohibited to obtain the family welfare, something like that.
right. Well, I suppose in a Thai context, that's a total disaster for that particular member if they're sort of excommunicated in that way from the family.
Yeah.
Right, right. Kim, from your side, looking at these, the popularity of constitutions for business families, a lot of it's led from the business schools promoting this quite heavily, and obviously from the children returning back from overseas who've attended some of these business schools, and they're become accustomed to this language. What do you see are the sort of legal implications where families perhaps don't take professional advice and start to use family charters in a almost a shareholder-like way? What do you see as the risks in using family charters without any sort of professional advice?
Well, I mean, the first thing, of course, to point out, as what Chinaphat said, that it's not a legally binding document, because it just sets out like I said, a code of conduct, what is expected of the family, and it's just an internal document for the family. So it doesn't have any legal force. It's not a legal document. So I think people do. I mean, the families that do use it, they do realize that it's not legally enforceable. So they do use it for the specific purpose of just keeping the family together in terms of conduct, in terms of how they foresee the business going forward, how they foresee providing for each other, the grandchildren, perhaps education, etc. So they do see it, in that way. I've not seen it used or intended to be used in a legal way. And
I think one
yeah.
case which might be relevant is where we look at family-owned companies. The sort of UK side of this has developed a stream of cases where they view these companies as a sort of quasi-partnership because of the close relation between the shareholders. So they almost start to engraft a sort of fiduciary obligation between the shareholders, which is not really a concept that's generally adhered to in common law, company law. And in that, sometimes they will look at what was the agreement between you all, not sitting on your strict corporate law principles, but looking at wider picture of what was agreed between the members on this sort of quasi-partnership basis. And the risk that is always sort of highlighted is if you've got a very detailed family constitution, that may actually be something that a judgment might want to look at, because you might say that that's manifesting what it was that you had agreement on. All members, no matter what your percentage shareholding, should be a director. You can't be excluded from the directorship. You should be entitled to information of a certain amount. And so it's always, in a common law system, there's always a little bit of a worry that these constitutions can sometimes stray into shareholder territory, in terms of shareholder agreement territory, and may have an unintended consequence if the shareholders fall out and it becomes a full-blown minority sort of oppression, prejudice claim being made in the courts to try and sort out their differences. So in that context, I suppose from a Malaysian perspective, there's not been that drive of jurisprudence coming through of families falling out and these sorts of documents being looked at as yet, because it's fairly new. Is that probably right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we do have families falling out and litigation going on with all sorts of dirty linen being washed in public.
Yeah.
But it hasn't got to, because family charters and constitution are still a fairly new thing.
Yes.
So I think we're still a few years behind the UK
Right.
in terms of the jurisprudence on that. So, you know, I don't think it has been quite an issue yet.
Right, right. Okay. All right. In terms of the international side, looking at international structuring, really the question being asked here is it possible to structure succession to the family business using an offshore entity or arrangement? And if so, what are the main considerations? So for the folks that are, you know, sat in international financial centers, from the trust companies, let's say, what can they do from, let's say, Singapore or Hong Kong or elsewhere to help with the succession process domestically? Obviously, in Malaysia, you've got Labuan, and that's sometimes seen as a sort of offshore jurisdiction within the Malaysian Federation. But what can be done within the market to help families if they want to have an international element to their business succession planning? And I think, Jennifer, I'd ask you to just lead us off with how much can we structure externally when it comes to a domestic Thai business?
In terms of the structure succession, in the view of international structuring,
yes,
yes, as you mentioned, Hong Kong, Singapore, they are the very popular. And another part of the structuring internationally is the in terms of the U.S. citizen, they adopt Delaware.
yeah,
And yes, because the offshore family holding company will be used to connect with the family trust offshore.
right, right.
And then to take a control the family business in Thailand. But you see, in Thailand, we have the foreign remit.
Right.
49% of the shares can be owned by the offshore family holding and offshore trust,
Right.
not over 49% in terms of the land code. And the in terms of the foreign business operation, and they're not allowed
Right.
the offshore entity to own more shares.
Right. Is it possible to confer more than 49% voting rights over the business, but keep the economic at the you know, people are bound to think of a ways round these foreign ownership restrictions, but insofar as the legal approach is concerned, can you have more effective voting control and still stay within the rules? Is that possible, or how do they do this?
Right. Good point, Zach. Good point. Because under Thai land law and Thai corporate law, we rely on the only percentage. No requirement on the control power, economic power, or directorship.
Right.
We just focus on the 49%. That's it.
Right. Right.
But if such the 49% owned by foreign entity are the preference shares with the special vote, still be a Thai company.
Right, got it. And
you need to understand the substance over form, just the 49%, that's it.
right, right. And presumably the shareholder arrangements that can be entered into would not, as long as you have the 49% being adhered to, the contractual relationships between the various shareholders would not be something that would be subject to overview within the relevant foreign ownership restrictions. Is that right?
Still okay.
Yeah.
You engage or commit under the special shareholders agreement or joint venture agreement or shareholders agreement, something like that. Still be okay. The law will not get into to attack.
Right, right, okay. And Kim, from your perspective, presumably with Malaysia, it's perfectly acceptable to have foreign structuring of domestic businesses. Is that correct?
On the whole, it is acceptable, it is possible, but there are I mean, we did away with our foreign investment committee requiring approval for foreign ownership some years ago. But there are still certain sectors and certain licenses that have been given to companies which may have some conditions to them,
right,
and which may in some way limit foreign ownership.
Right.
So that is one consideration that has to be taken account of. But other than those specific conditions attached to licenses, yes, it is perfectly possible to structure succession to a family business using offshore trust arrangements. That's very popular. The jurisdictions you mentioned are also very popular.
Right.
And the main considerations, as always, would be tax.
Yes.
Perhaps not so much from the Malaysian angle, because we don't have corporate gains tax anyway, or company gains tax, capital gains tax. So it's more an issue of the prospective beneficiaries. So if they live in countries that will have implications from a tax point of view that is detrimental to them if they inherit it directly,
yes,
then it will help to go through certain planning arrangements. And I think the other one as well is that sometimes the feeling amongst the family members, shareholders, is that perhaps you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket,
yes,
or if they're a bit concerned about political upheaval.
yes.
So maybe it's better to have some things offshore.
Right, right.
So those are the sort of main considerations.
Yeah. Okay, so just the ordinary sort of due diligence that families would do when they're looking at that, but there's no hard stop for them structuring internationally, subject to, of course, specific cases where there is a licensing issue, right?
Yeah.
All right, now, the final bit on the domestic side is looking at domestic family offices, and here it's really, where are we in terms of the demand for family offices within each of the markets? And which is the most prevalent family office? And I'll explain what I mean by the different types that I've listed. So multifamily offices is effectively a professional firm that manages families' monies, multiple clients' monies, but it doesn't comprise a group of families together. You can, of course, have those, but in the context I'm using it, we're really looking at external asset managers professionally running multiple families as clients. Investment offices are really looking, for this purpose, is looking at an individual entrepreneur or an individual who's managing the investments in a professionalized way, his own investments, but there's no collective family wealth involved. It's just one particular family member that's doing that for their own account. And then the single family office is really where we have family money from different branches being consolidated and used and managed under the umbrella of a full-fledged single family office. So from a domestic standpoint, Chinapat, do we have much interest in Bangkok, in the business families, in establishing family offices? Do we have multifamily offices proliferating in Bangkok? How does this look from your perspective?
Not only in Bangkok, not in Thailand. The concept or knowledge about the family office is really low in Thailand and
right.
But last 2 years, the Thai commercial bank SCB joined with the Jewish bank from Switzerland, set up a new business, estate planning and family office division. But this is not the first time, because in the past, some family business, they try to create something as a result of the family charter. To proceed with the family rule, to proceed with the family welfare, family asset management, family welfare, family investment, family meeting, and then family paper for example, minutes of the meeting of the family members.
Right.
And then the family office will be the center of the family business, separate from the corporate office. Because the corporate office is easier for the business perspective, but for the family member can enjoy and utilize the family office to be the center of communication. It's a big issue, communication.
Right. But that's fairly exceptional for a family to involve a integrated system like that involving a family office. The general feel is that because the Thai families are obviously quite advanced in terms of their seniority and age, but it seems interesting that they wouldn't have already started to develop a domestic family office market. Is it really just the case that there's a lack of knowledge as to what's the usefulness of the family office? Is that the case, or is it there's not enough professionals doing it, or why is that happening?
This is a big issue, Zach. The knowledge and education in terms of the family business. We have not much the course or program of the family business in Thailand in the university,
Right,
just the short course, and then that's why the family office knowledge just limit.
right,
And the leading players in the market is the bank. The
right.
bank not only in Thailand but from Singapore, from Hong Kong, visit the family business client in Thailand
Ah, right,
every month. That and then the banks from Singapore and Hong Kong, they try to push the knowledge only the investment. The family office in the meaning of investment, but at the real practice, no, it's
right,
more than that.
right. Okay. And Kim, from your side, are these things popular with the families, or is it the same case that there is a lack of knowledge on why would you find this useful as a business family?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways it's quite similar to Thailand.
Right.
There is a lack of knowledge. So in the same way that you had mentioned earlier that, family charters, it is an invention of the business schools. So
Yeah.
when the younger members come back, so similarly, family offices, would have been something that came about through the same routes. So
Right.
it's the younger members who then, talk about, hey, we're big enough. Maybe we should have a family office where everything is centralized.
Right.
And, more than just investments, they deal with everything to do with the family,
Right.
and handle everybody's, travel, to the family meetings and things like that.
Yes.
So it's still a new concept.
Mm.
And I think it's also very similar to Thailand. The banks on the forefront of pushing this, especially Malaysia. In the case of Malaysia, it will be banks from Singapore,
Yes. Right.
and I think it helps that Singapore has a very tax incentivized regime for
Yeah.
family offices. So that helps them in pushing the whole concept to Malaysian family businesses.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's a good point to actually move on to looking at the international family office, and particularly the Singapore single family office. And at this point, I just invite Spencer to just make a few remarks on the Singapore single family office for members who are watching, who are unaware of the advantages and the growth of this particular offering in Singapore, and why it's being adopted so widely. So, Spencer, I just invite you to make your usual remarks on the single family office.
Thanks so much, Zach, and then thanks also, to Kim and Chinapat for your sharing. I think it's been very useful, getting a better understanding of how the landscape is like in terms of family businesses, as well as the view on family offices within your different locations. And I think Singapore has, we have seen very strong growth in the number of family offices being set up in Singapore in the past few years. In particular, many of these families come from the region, including Malaysia and Thailand, and probably more Malaysian than Thailand, possibly because of the geographical proximity and also because of the nature of their business. So some of the reasons that they have chosen to set up a family office in Singapore, I think essentially it depends on how the family's business is being organized at this point in time. If they have assets which are distributed across different parts of the world, they see the family office as a useful entity to consolidate the management of these assets. At times also it's because of the family members and their changing demands of the lifestyle. They may decide that they want to move to a different location, and the family office actually offers a good opportunity or means by which they can move overseas. For example, when they set up a family office in Singapore, they can elect to employ themselves under the family office, or certain family members who are looking to live in Singapore, and that provides a means for them to apply for an employment pass to work in Singapore, managing the family office while living here at the same time. And I think amongst the various factors that they have seen attractive in setting up a family office in Singapore would be the political and economic stability, because ultimately what they're looking to do is to protect the wealth that they have accumulated over the years. And Singapore provides that independent jurisdiction and sound environment to help with that. At the same time, being able to access global opportunities, be it from the primary markets or even in the secondary markets, being able to access financial products from around the world, and also being able to access private investment opportunities such as private equity and venture capital. They also find that very attractive, because I think amongst a lot of family offices, apart from the traditional financial investments, they're looking at certain investments which could give potential for growth in the portfolio, and possibly for some families to give them a second lease of life, having started their own family business, being very successful in it. They want to go through the same experience again, but more in an advisory role with new companies. So that represents a certain attraction for them as well. But I think also a main reason that many of these international families decide to set up in Singapore is because of the tax arrangements that they can benefit from. For example, the 13X and 13R schemes that we are running in Singapore, which actually allows for any investments which are being made by family offices, being managed by family offices, to be exempt from any taxes on the gains from these investments. And this arrangement is an arrangement that is a long-term arrangement. The tax exemption is available for as long as these assets are being managed out of Singapore. So it provides transparency and certainty to these families when it comes to their tax exposure. And that has been very attractive, especially for wealth preservation from an intergenerational transfer. If you want your next generation to continue to, benefit from the assets, they're able to establish a family office and avail themselves of the tax exemptions in order to do so. I think there was also mentioned early on about trust structures. We also have quite a well-developed trust legislation available, and that also helps for those families which are looking to move their assets within a trust structure to benefit multiple generations going forward. So I think these are some of very attractive qualities which have made Singapore attractive to family offices. And I think it's an area that we could continue to work together to support any of the families from your locations which are looking to explore opportunities overseas, to consider having their presence in Singapore. Given the geographical proximity between Singapore and your various locations, I think that makes it very attractive for them, especially if they continue to be involved in the operating business back in Malaysia and Thailand.
Jennifer, from your side in Thailand, if a Thai family wishes to establish a single family office in Singapore, are there significant capital controls in terms of the funding of that particular family office? Is there those concerns? Can they easily transfer enough funds out of Thailand to make it a viable platform?
In the past, yes, Zach. But late last year, the Bank of Thailand relaxed the requirement in terms of the fund transfer outside from Thailand to offshore. And then the Bank of Thailand, the BOT, adopt the new rule. They adopt the negative list. Negative list means all transaction you can transfer the fund out of Thailand, but only around 8 lists not allowed, but need to be approved from the Bank of Thailand first.
Right.
And from now on, the freedom of the fund transfer from Thailand to offshore to set up the family office in Singapore is okay, easy.
Yeah.
I have a question to Spencer
Mm.
because not only the family business set up the family office single in Singapore, but if I ask the service provider set up the family office for providing the service in Singapore and work with the banks in Singapore, work with the trust advisor in Singapore to take care the office, family business in Thailand is okay.
Um, Yeah, I think essentially, if you're looking at using a family office structure in Singapore to continue to manage the business in Thailand,
Yep.
I think that is an arrangement that could be implemented as well if that is the decision by the family to also hold the operating business under the family office structure. Yeah, so I think there are some examples, although I think from a structuring perspective, we need to work with the lawyers to see what kind of structure makes sense for these families.
Yep. You mean a single family office that allowed by the MAS in Singapore can be the service provider, like myself set up my family office service,
Uh-huh.
right? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so sorry, so you're talking about as a professional service provider to establish a presence in Singapore to work with clients back in Thailand.
Yes.
I think that is something that is possible. But if, let's say, for example, you are looking to provide legal advice in
Yes.
Singapore, then
Yeah.
there are relevant registration requirements that
Okay.
you need to undergo. If, let's say, the intention is not to provide the legal aspect of the advice, you can work with a local partner. For example, you could, partner with Zach, and he could, provide the legal aspect of things. Whereas from your perspective, you're dealing with the Thai side of things and engagement with the family members. That's
great. That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Juniper, just coming back to that point around the transfer of funds out of Thailand,
Yep.
is there a limit to the amount that can be sent out in any 1 year?
Yes. They have the list of the fund transfer. For example, you will remit the fund to purchase the asset out of Thailand. If you are the qualified investor in Thailand, qualified investor means you have the at least 50 million baht, 50 million baht, around 2 million Singapore dollar,
Yeah.
right? And then you can do the fund transfer for a specific purpose, and then you can do that freely.
Right, and there's no limit to the actual capital amount that you can send out.
That's right. That's right.
Right, got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, Kim, from your side, transferring funds from Malaysia to Singapore for the purpose of establishing a family office, are there any considerations in doing that?
I think for investments, to carry out investment, there up to a very large amount is allowed, but it also depends on the circumstances of the person transmitting the funds, whether they have borrowings as well in Malaysia. That sets the first level of the limit. If you don't, the limit is higher. If you do, then there is a limit. Then you just need to get approval or to fill in a form before you exceed that limit. So it shouldn't be that difficult to transfer funds to Singapore to set up a family office.
Okay, and more generally, when we look at the obviously we're still going through the COVID crisis, looking at post-COVID tax administration response to this, do we expect any tightening up of the tax rules or introduction of new forms of taxes that could impact the ability to send funds abroad, to enjoy the growth of capital abroad without taxation? Do we see any mutterings at the moment from the tax authorities that there will likely be a little bit more aggression in terms of the provisions that are likely to come in as part of the recovery package? Are you seeing anything from that in Malaysia, for instance?
I think the mutterings have not been so much to do with prohibiting money being sent out or, you know, for investments and things like that. The mutterings have more been to do with whether they should start introducing a wealth tax, for
Yes.
example, in Malaysia, or inheritance, bring back, you know, estate duty,
Yes.
which has been out for many, many years.
Yeah.
And also whether there should be a capital gains tax, because Malaysia doesn't have capital gains tax at the moment, except for gains in real property.
Mm.
So, you know, I think every government in the world will be having these sort of conversations because
Yes.
of all the, you know, solutions they've had to come up with to assist their people in the time of this pandemic. So they have to balance the books eventually, and they will have to raise income to pay for, you know, all the benefits that they've been doling out.
Right. And Chinapat, from your side, for the Thai government, have they been saying anything about or the introduction of, let's say, a greater rate? You already have inheritance taxes, but bringing in greater rates of, you know, percentage of taxation on wealth that's sent across generations, particularly when it involves things like a family business. Have you heard anything around the post-COVID recovery sort of tax approach?
In terms of the COVID recovery for tax perspective, the government they try to delay the tax payment and the tax filing, and reduce the rate for withholding tax locally. And then in the long run, the Thai government they prepare to do the Thai tax reform. And then now we have the gift tax, we have the inheritance tax, we have the new property tax, and then the VAT rate or GST in Malaysia and Singapore, VAT in Thailand. Now the current rate is 7%.
Yes.
But we are talking about increase or not, different from the income tax, the corporate income tax now 20% on the net profit, and after that, for example, 100 is a net profit, 20 is a corporate tax, and then 80 will be dividend tax is 10%.
Right.
Then Thailand we have the effective tax rate for corporate tax 28. Different from personal tax. Personal tax are so high, 35, in the past 37. And under the Thai tax reform scheme, the corporate tax rate will be reduced from 20 to be 16.65 for corporate tax. And then the individual tax rate from 35 will be 25, and then equal, right?
I mean, and then looking more broadly, obviously Thailand will be adopting the CRS the year after next. Do you feel that will usher in, or is there an idea behind that ushering in an increase in the sort of inheritance tax rates and maybe a more comprehensive approach to the high net worth community or the business family community in Thailand once the CRS data starts moving? Do you think that will likely be a case, or how is this being viewed from the ground in Thailand?
In terms of the CIS, the Thai Ministry of Finance signed the MOU among the international communities in the last 2 years to join the CIS scheme, and then the draft law under the process by managed by the Revenue Department, and hopefully it will come to effect in the next few years. And in terms of the increase of the tax rate of inheritance tax, I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Just 5%, really low.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. We've got a couple of questions that have come up. One of them, I think, is aimed at you, Kim. What kind of, it's a chatty message, what kind of rights could be reserved by a client if to set up the Lab 1 Foundation? Is it still asset protection that they're looking at? And things in the business family context, the sort of reservation of rights into one of these foundations, presumably it's all going to be around how families vote and control the underlying business, how they reach consensus on how to operate the foundation. Is that probably right in terms
Yeah,
of?
and often, well, that is quite right. And they can also reserve rights over investments.
Ah,
So they can, have a say over what investments the foundation goes into, which I think is probably an advantage over, say, trust, where you can't reserve your rights so openly as in the case of a foundation.
right.
And in terms of the asset protection, that is still there because once property is endowed into a foundation, then the Labuan Foundations Act provides that the property then becomes property of the foundation. It's no longer the property of the founder who has endowed the foundation. So if it's no longer the property of the founder, then obviously, creditors can't, go against that property. Of course, we do have provisions for fraudulent disposition. I mean, you have to prove that the disposition into the foundation was done fraudulently with the intent to defraud a creditor.
Yes.
Which is quite unusual.
Yeah.
Provision.
Okay, and then there's a follow-on. Is there capital controls in Malaysia in the sense of transferring funds out? Is there a capital control aspect to that?
Well, we would say there is no capital controls in Malaysia. I mean, previously there were capital controls, but it's been really loosened to such a great extent that now it's at a very high level before you need to get the approval, and oftentimes money can be sent out freely.
Right. Okay. I think just one final question for Juniper. Juniper, the Thai trust law. Why is it taking so long to get this law in the books? What's going on? It's been in draft form for a long time.
You see, I have reviewed the draft law of the private trust or family trust, and then I used the draft law to do the in-house training for the asset management company in Thailand, and some banks from Singapore.
Right. Okay.
Some banks from Singapore, because in the Thailand perspective, the life insurance will be used for the PR and marketing tools in terms of inheritance tax protection. But when you do the life insurance in Singapore, that's good that Spencer joined this event, because the bank RM Bank advised the client in Thailand that when you use the life insurance UL, Universal Life Insurance UL, and for example, premium 3 million baht, 3 million US dollar, you can spend remit only 1 million and make a loan from the bank in Singapore 2 million baht. This life insurance policy, it is understood that no need to specify the name of beneficiary. Is it correct, Spencer? I think it's true, right? And then and then if no beneficiary under the Thai law, the Supreme Court recently ruled that if the life insurance policy lack of beneficiary, the benefit proceeds from the insurance will go to the estate and then go to the successor. This is subject to inheritance tax in Thailand.
I don't know, Spencer will know the answer to that.
Very technical question.
Yeah.
I mean, insofar as our trust legislation does not require the disclosure of the identities of the beneficiaries, I think conceptually this would be an arrangement that we would allow for. I don't think there'd be any specific so-called tax arrangements or attribution of the proceeds to specific estates. Yeah, but I can't comment in a very specific and
Yes, that's the Zach. And then in addition to the life insurance,
Yes.
the family trust will be used to support the inheritance tax because in the other countries, when you have the inheritance tax or estate tax, you will have the family trust law.
Right. And so you think that the Thai trust law will finally come in 2022?
Maybe,
That's what it's about?
yes, maybe.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, look, thank you very much, guys, for running through this. Thanks very much, Kim, Chinapat, and obviously Spencer. Thank you very much for spending time. And also to everyone that has joined and sort of spent time watching our webinar today. Tomorrow we'll have the sort of finale of the entire series where we'll deal with the single family office. But for today, I think I'll close the session just with the same admonition that obviously the stuff that you've heard today is not and does not constitute legal advice, and that if you have any specific cases, you ought to seek specific legal advice on that. So these are just the sincere views of practitioners on sort of hypothetical scenarios. All right. Well, thank you very much. You'll circulate the slides as well as the recordings in the usual way. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye bye. Bye bye.